our revenues, I don't see any reason, given these projections, why we couldn't refund some of that to our citizens. I'm talking about a rebate of our mill levy, or a lowering of our mill levy. Because understanding that this all happened because we increased our mill levy substantially in 2011, 2012 to, the current level. And so I'm just throwing that out there as almost a policy inquiry that maybe we might want to think about it. If our balances look this healthy, even with additional investment, maybe we might want to think about doing a gradual drawdown of that mill levy at some point in the near future. And that's if, of course, we see the anticipated economic development that I think we all think that it's going to be coming soon.
I think you're making a valid point, Councilmember Schutt. I guess I would also say the other caveat would be if you feel like you're making the necessary investments both to replace aging infrastructure as well as setting the stage for that new development, right? Because we know that there are some needs to invest in new infrastructure on both cases. But yes, I think that's a valid point to be debated.
Yep. I have one quick question. Can you go back, I think, 2 slides?
Sure.
Sorry.
Right here?
So on this, is this assuming, so like special assessments, is this assuming that everybody's paying what they're supposed to be paying? Or is this assuming that they're paying at the rate they are today? So for instance, like the Russell property. Are we assuming that we're collecting that at 100%, or are we assuming what we're getting from them today?
Depending on benefit district. Obviously, that particular group is a problem. That is assuming they're not paying.
So this takes them out of the equation?
But the county has not been overly timely on collections. So I'm assuming I'm going to get it 5 years out.
Okay.
So on all the things that are delinquent, I'm assuming, actually I've moved some of them back because I've called them this year, like I do every year, and said, hey, but assuming I'm going to get it eventually, but not assuming it in the near term.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to understand. Thank you.
And you actually just foreshadowed the point I was going to make, Councilmember Harrison, that really you do have an issue with a limited number, but still significant, in any case, number of delinquent assessments that need to get resolved, either directly with the property owners or with the county's help. And so certainly, just from a housekeeping perspective, but also just because also some of these delinquent assessments are keeping you from perhaps making some of the investments as you see fit going forward, I think staff would certainly welcome your continued attention to this, because it is not by any means a catastrophic problem, but it is something that it would be nice to get resolved so that you can move forward with a clean slate. I wanted to also mention your utility funds, your water, wastewater, and electric. We didn't take as close of a look at those funds because they don't relate to property taxes. They are self-supporting. But just with the tax-supported debt, you are seeing a similar reduction in your utility-supported debt. So you have another set of discussions to have about investing in your utility infrastructure, both to replace aging infrastructure, but also, again, to make investments to spur economic development and tax-based diversification. The other thing I would point out here, though, is besides your utility funds, which will be the capacity will be increasing in, you do have other tools available to you under state law to also help offset the impact of your utilities for development-related investments. And you're familiar with tax increment financing, you're familiar with CIDs, you may be at least. CIDs are a newer tool relating more to retail development, but that's where you could have a supplemental sales tax on top of the city's existing sales tax, or even do a special assessment via the CID to help, again, recoup some of that investment and reduce the impact on your utility funds. So I wanted to note that you have some options with utility-related infrastructure that you don't necessarily have with a police station or streets, things like that, where you are, or street replacement, where you're really using general tax dollars. Does that make sense to?
But even things like police stations, for example, we could pursue additional funding options like granting or anything like that, and
sure,
that would very
absolutely
offset a lot of that.
Unfortunately, it seems like every week those become harder to get, but certainly there are still options.
Yes.
Yep. And you do see that with some of your street infrastructure. I think staff's been really good about getting grants from Johnson County Cars and KDOT in some cases, and
Yes.
that would continue to be the case. So then, really, just to wrap things up, I wanted to point out also that we often have discussions with clients about using cash versus using debt, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. The point here isn't to drive you in one direction or the other. The point was really to help illustrate, hopefully, that you do have capacity to make capital investments. Debt financing, we think, has some benefits, especially for higher cost, longer useful life infrastructure. You know, it smooths out the fiscal impact. You avoid some of the spikes that you have when you're just drawing down fund balance to make multi-million-dollar purchases. Also, from a policy perspective, I think there's an argument to be made that debt financing can be more equitable because you're spreading out that cost over a portion of the useful life. So it's not just the existing taxpayers, it's future taxpayers that are helping as well. But that said, you can certainly use your resources to do cash funding of certain projects, and that would probably mean shifting some of your property tax capacity from your bond and interest fund back to the general funds to make those capital investments. But you absolutely have the option of doing that, and I think the point is to move forward with capital planning, set those priorities, and then follow through on your action plan as you see fit. So really, you have capacity either with cash or debt to replace infrastructure or to invest in new infrastructure. Really, I think your CIP process that you're going through now is identifying both of those types of investments. And we would just strongly encourage, as your fiduciary and as your financial advisor, encourage you to embrace strategic planning and capital improvement planning, because it does touch on all of your major objectives as a city council, and because folks like S&P really, really like it. And, at a basic level, it helps you decide your priorities for investing your resources. So you're not revisiting and reinventing the wheel every year. You've got a plan, you're working the plan. Of course, that plan comes up for debate and reallocation, but you're working the plan. So with that, I'll turn it back over to staff if you don't have any questions, but please also do not hesitate to call me or email me with any questions. Most of my interaction is with your staff, but I also am happy to answer questions from any of you if this percolates additional questions.
Bruce, I do. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, you go.
Go ahead.
You go.
Would it be possible for us to get a digital copy of the presentation, just emailed to us so we have a reference point for this moving forward? Perfect.
I think that'll be done now.
Then, there's a couple more. For 2015, we referenced the debt service at $9.32 million. What was the number for 2014? Do we know by any chance? I mean, is it?
It's a little bit lower. I actually know,
Down?
it's a little bit lower.
Okay.
And the reason it's a little bit higher is that the school district benefit district projects that you're participating in,
Right.
I think that's really the only thing that's bumping it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
The total debt service. And then the final question I had, so for 2015, we're looking at a budget of 53.3, total budget capacity, with just debt service of 9.32. I didn't know if there's an industry standard or where those ratios for high-performing city that we like to talk about should be, or if it is just case by case, or if in the industry they look at a city and say, your debt service should be X% of your total yearly budget.
Sure. Yeah, Councilmember Freeman, that's a really good question. I guess I would ask you, the $55 million, does that include all of your enterprise funds?
It does.
It does, okay. Clearly, Gardner had to take on a lot of debt with its high growth, explosive growth period in the 90s and early to mid 2000s. I think you handled that as well as you could, but a lot of it was just needing to get done in order to handle the demand to be located in Gardner. You're certainly still, today in 2014, a high debt community.
Okay.
And S&P has identified that. But that's not the be-all and end-all, right? It's really about the whole picture. How are you doing with fund balances? How are you doing with maintaining service levels? Other indicators of financial management and sophistication. They understand why the city took on the debt you did, especially a lot of that utility-related debt, and that it's self-supporting. They actually back it out of their equations to some extent to really try to get to what's tax-supported versus utility-supported. So there's no, bright line or clear best practice. I think it's they want to make sure that you're,